This week, we welcome Jeff Pollard, Vice President, Principal Analyst on the Security and Risk team at Forrester Research, to discuss the emergence of the Chief Trust Officer. In the Leadership and Communications segment, why must CISOs slay a cyber dragon to earn business respect? Simon Sinek says the most successful people in the world hit zero or come close to it. Failure is the gift. The remote leadership paradox, why your team feels micromanaged and abandoned, and how to fix it, and more. Business Security Weekly starts now.
This is a Security Weekly production for security professionals by security professionals. Please visit securityweekly.com/subscribe to subscribe to all the shows on our network.
It's the show where we explore the business of security to improve the security of business. Your trusted source for actionable insights on leadership, communication, and innovation. Get ready for Business Security Weekly. This podcast is supported by AutoRabbit. You trust Salesforce to power your business, but even the best systems have blind spots. Hidden risk like over-permissioned users, untested code, and missing backups can quietly slip through the cracks. AutoRabbit closes those gaps. Their DevSecOps platform brings automation, governance, and security together so you can build fast and stay protected. Because speed means nothing if you can't trust what you deliver. Visit securityweekly.com/AutoRabbit to learn more. Ransomware, supply chain attacks, 0 days. Cyber threats don't wait, and neither should your business. With ThreatLocker, you're not just reacting to threats, you're stopping them before they start. Our Zero Trust endpoint protection locks down your environment with pinpoint control over what's allowed to run and what's not. No guesswork, no blind spots. Just proactive, built-for-now security that keeps your business moving. Want to see how a true default deny strategy works? Head over to securityweekly.com/ThreatLocker and take the first step towards shutting the door on threats before they even knock. Welcome to Business Security Weekly. This is episode number 419, recorded October 27th, 2025. I'm your host, Matt Alderman. Joining me for this interview are all of my co-hosts. We have us all in the house today. First, Mr. Jason Albuquerque.
Hey, Matt.
What a weekend.
Hey, listen, my New England Patriots topping the AFC East, 5 in a row for the wins. I don't know. I looked across the NFL, and I don't see any other winners on this call.
Nope.
You're so right. It was a brutal Sunday night in Pittsburgh.
That's right. That's right. So, listen, I'll take the win. And, Drake May's quarterback rating's looking pretty good, guys. Yeah. Not going to lie.
They're looking good. So let's go to Summer Fowler. Summer, you've been gone for a while, yes. Penn State and Pittsburgh have been, Pittsburgh's still on top of the AFC North, so, yeah. Or Central, right? So it's, yes, it was a brutal loss last night, but they're still doing well.
Yeah, we'll see how it goes. We were on some college visits. So actually I had my daughter out at Penn State the day after they fired Franklin. So that was a wild one on campus at that time. And so we'll see what goes on. My husband's a Penn State grad, so we're following to see what happens.
Yeah, too many open coaching positions in college football right now. There's a lot, especially after the LSU firing yesterday. So yeah, lots of them. Yep. And last but not least, Mr. Ben Carr. Welcome, Ben.
Yeah, save me for last because I am not in the football. I see how it goes. But happy to be here again, looking for a little bit cooler weather. Halloween this week, so excited about that. That's kind of our family's holiday. So yeah, should be good. And if only to be a fired football coach with millions of dollars and not have to do anything. Seems like that's a better gig than actually running through a bunch of seasons and dealing with the stress and aggravation. Sounds like a CISO role.
However, some of those buyouts, by the way, require you to actively look for a job or they don't get all the pay. So some of these contracts are structured really weird. Yes, actively. Yes.
I'm looking really hard in Aruba. Yeah.
Yeah, right. All right, let's get into it. Jeff is no stranger to Business Security Weekly. He primarily contributes to Forrester's offerings for security and risk professionals. He leads Forrester's research on the role of the CISO, specializing in topics related to security strategy, budgets, metrics, business cases, and presenting to the board. His research also includes security services, featuring global coverage of managed security services, professional security services, and security as a service. Jeff, Always a pleasure to have you back on Business Security Weekly.
Yeah, thanks for having me. As always, love joining.
Yeah, you guys do great research. Like I say this every time you guys come on. It's great to have a relationship with you guys because you come on and you share your research. And I think it's a great way for people to get access to some of that research, even if they're not a Forrester client. So we appreciate it greatly, actually.
Yeah, absolutely.
So we're going to talk about the emergence of the Chief Trust Officer. And so here's where I want to start. Did we start with a Chief Trust Officer that down this path of creating the Trust Center, or did this concept of the Trust Center create the Chief Trust Officer, or how linked are they? Because I see this Trust Center trend emerging, and I'm trying to figure out who's the chicken and who's the egg.
Yeah, I think so. I think they both kind of emerged at the same time, to your point. And the reason why both of them happened is because of customer requirements and partner requirements. That's universally what we're seeing, right? The fact that when you look at so much of what security leaders do now, it's not driven by kind of internal initiatives. It's more driven by externalities. It's basically, what are the regulatory requirements? We've had that for a long time, right? That's kind of the boogeyman that we've always sort of lived with. But on the other side of that, it's really about, what are our partners requiring us to do from a security perspective? And what are our customers requiring us to do? All those third-party risk management questionnaires, the phone calls that happen after those third-party risk management questionnaires to negotiate what's in the third-party risk management questionnaire and what's documented. Well, one answer to that is, okay, well, instead of us just emailing each other back and forth, here's a Trust Center. And so that'll make it easier. That'll make it more scalable. You can now point customers to that and say, well, check out what we're doing here. And then if you have some more questions, we can talk through it. At the same time, especially for large B2B providers, like B2B software companies in particular, those deals are so large, the customer concerns are so important that the Chief Trust Officer role started to emerge in those organizations, primarily to handle very, very similar things, but in a little bit of a different way, where the questionnaire just ultimately wouldn't suffice, right? They wanted a point of presence. They wanted a belly button that they could sort of talk with and talk to about security. And so they kind of emerged and evolved around the same time, with the Trust Center aimed a little bit more down market in a lot of cases, and the Chief Trust Officer being a little bit more up market.
So Jeff, it's funny. I'm smiling here a little bit because I'm going to put on my old crotchety, old school CISO hat and say, back in my day, that was the job of the CISO, right? Yep. What went wrong? What went sideways, right? How did this emerge when many CISOs had that underneath their responsibilities, right? That was part of their job, was to do these Trust Center activities. Did it just get too big? And the reason why I ask is, I've spoken with so many CEOs who are trying to hone down the amount of people reporting up to them, yep. Right? Get the C-level executive a little bit more controlled, and not have so many C-level positions in their company. So where did this go sideways?
So I think we can look at it as it going sideways, or we can look at it as a bit of a positive for the CISOs out there. But to your point, I think what happened is it did get too important. I mean, that's ultimately what happened, right? It turned into this world where, if you look kind of historically and going back to research I had done on CISOs before this, in a lot of scenarios, what we found is that there was sort of a carpeted floor versus a concrete floor distinction for CISOs almost in the manufacturing world, or in the technology world. It was sort of like CISOs were responsible for enterprise security. So the security of employees, but not the security of the product or service. That was a product responsibility. And maybe there was someone involved in product security that probably didn't even report up through the CISO, or maybe they did in like a dotted line way. And so what you found is that the stuff that you were selling to customers wasn't being secured in the same way that the enterprise itself was being secured. And so the elevation of this role is, one, to kind of get product security under the role of the CISO, because now it's about the security of the product and service that you're selling, but it's also about broad-based enterprise-wide security. And then there's even some chief trust officers in some more limited occasions that have things like accessibility as part of their remit, with the premise being that, part of what a vendor promises their customers is that the software works for them. That's it. That's the statement, right? Mm-hmm. And so accessibility is about trust, because we need to trust the software is going to work for our employees, no matter how they're interacting with that software. And so that's an area where even accessibility in some cases will fall under that. And so I think in the sense that it went sideways, what ultimately happened is that everyone kind of figured out that the third party is the biggest risk that we have, whether it's, a Salesforce, SalesLoft drift situation. We've seen the ramifications of that, whether it's a Jaguar Land Rover, scenario in the UK, which ultimately started to impact 130 to 150,000 people from an employment perspective, off of a breach of one company based on its supply chain. What we found is ultimately that we're putting our company at so much risk. There's so much legal implications of these items, right? Depending on lawsuits and litigation, that we need someone that is more clear in the distinct responsibilities they have. And that's what kind of led to this elevation.
So one more follow-up question to that, because you bring up some really good points, right? Does the trust officer's area or scope of accountability go beyond just cyber and data protection and protecting the product? Because, I've seen over the course of my career, sometimes as a CISO, we get asked questions around ESG, environmental social governance policy and controls like that. Does this trust officer now start taking some of those other places that weren't necessarily cyber or data privacy or cyber protections? Do they take some of that responsibility as well?
They do. We're seeing things like ESG become a part of that. Absolutely. Yeah. We're seeing things like resilience as an entire concept, right? Which unfortunately resilience in cybersecurity is very poorly defined based on kind of who's marketing it in various scenarios. But we're seeing resilience become a part of this conversation. We're seeing legal and privacy becoming part of this conversation as well. And again, the sort of central premise there being that the chief trust officer is responsible for safeguarding the promises that company is making to its customers. And that's a part of trust, right? When you start to break that promise, you violated that trust. And so anything that has to do with that external promise that's made to customers, partners, and suppliers, that can fall into the chief trust officer's remit in some possible way. The challenge, which you brought up, is that ultimately CISOs already had a lot to do. And so by elevating a CISO, in fact, the vast majority, I think sort of 11 of 16 chief trust officers we looked at had all been CISOs before chief trust officer. Of course, the challenge there is that when you start giving this one role so many more things to do, that can be problematic because CISOs already have so much to do. In some cases, elevating them can help clarify some of that responsibility because CISOs often will then report into the chief trust officer. So you kind of get elevated. The CISO now reports into you, which is great because you can streamline or at least refine some of those responsibilities. But I don't know many CISOs out there that are sort of, that have a lot of free time. So that's one of the challenges here is that to some extent, we've got to elevate them so that we can actually start building an organization that makes sense for the kind of enterprise we're operating within right now.
Yeah, Jeff.
That's what I was going to ask. Oh, go ahead, Ben.
I was just going to say that I've actually had a security and trust officer title, 2 roles already. And that's kind of where I see it. It's Jason said, going sideways. I see it just like changing alignment and actually being more aligned to the business, right? We often talk about how much security needs to be aligned to the business. And I think this is that because everything we do as security officers is really about trust, right? It aligns back to protecting the business. And why do we care if not to protect our customers and our partners, right? Like that's why we would do it. Otherwise, who cares? So I kind of see it as that. And you kind of brought that out. I don't know if you have any more to say about it, but I definitely see it as kind of the evolution, the morphing of the CISO to be more business aligned and to take more
but
ownership.
Ben, to your point though, right? This is why I made the argument. We talked about elevating the CISO to be that. And now there's a new role coming on board. Mm-hmm. So what does that do to the CISO now? Are they relegated down to the technical again? Because this is the dichotomy of what we're talking about, right?
Yeah, I don't think it's actually, Jeff, I'll let you answer that. You kind of pose it to the end of my question there. I don't necessarily see it that way because, look, we all have large organization. You're going to have a deputy CISO, right? You're going to have somebody who's responsible for IAM, somebody who's got to be responsible for attack surface or vulnerability management, right? Like incident response. All these things, like if I'm hiring somebody for that, I'm looking for somebody who has business acumen and a business aligned to make sure that the mission that I'm carrying forward is then still aligned at lower levels. So I kind of see it that way. But Jeff, do you see it that way as well? It's somebody who's more aligned to that vertical and the CISO gets more responsibility as the trust officer.
Yeah, that's exactly what happened. So 11 of the 16 that we looked at in this research and a bunch that we talked to had all been CISOs prior to this. And so for them, this was an elevation of their responsibility. And universally with the CISOs that we spoke to, it wasn't their first CISO gig. In fact, most of them had been CISOs for multiple decades or like a decade and a half, right? Plus, so this was kind of a 15-year plus experience. They were on their third, maybe their fourth CISO role. And what they sort of thought is that, by me being elevated, I'm able to bring in or promote up a CISO. And the thing about that CISO that reports to me is that they're probably not as business savvy as I am, because it's the first time they're sitting in that chair. So by me being chief trust officer, I can start to cultivate and mentor them to be more business savvy. So that way they can go and take something like, hey, let's look at all the third-party risk management questionnaires we filled out from a metrics perspective. Let's look at all the revenue or all the contributed pipeline that those questionnaires were a part of, and let's use that as a metric to show our business value, right? This is where security is helping us close deals with partners. They're helping us close deals with customers. Let's show that. Most CISOs you talk to, especially the first time in the role, they are coming from being more technical. They're not ready to have a conversation like that. But the chief trust officers, the folks that have been around a little while, they kind of understand that that's a big part of their job, is showing that I'm not a cost center. I'm a cost of doing business, but that means I'm part of revenue, right? It's different. Cost center doesn't generate revenue, but a cost of goods sold kind of calculation for security, that's still a part of revenue. It might subtract from margin a little bit, but there are deals we wouldn't have won unless we helped. And so that's where I think that elevation helps, because then you can bring in that less business savvy CISO and start teaching them what it's like to sit in that chair.
So Jeff, that's great. I was going to ask you a question that was kind of along these lines with the reporting structures that are happening. You know, in the CISO world, we battle all the time with what is the right level of what I should be presenting to other execs and to the board. So what are the measures of success for a chief trust officer? And what would you be presenting?
Yeah, I think one is kind of like we just laid out, is using that metric around, hey, what are we contributing from a pipeline perspective? How much revenue did security contribute last quarter with those third-party risk management questionnaires, with that engagement in the trust center if you have one? How many conversations did product security have? How many deals did you kind of help push through? I think that's a big one. I often use this metric as an example for marketing, and if there's someone in marketing listening to this, they'll get really upset by how I describe this. But when you think about marketing contributed pipeline, it's effectively like, hey, somebody came to the website, they entered the sales funnel or the sales waterfall, they converted, and marketing takes credit for that. And that's fine. That's how that works, right? That's marketing contributed pipeline. They sort of attach themselves to that revenue, even if what they did was have a website. And then a sales team got involved and actually sold that account. It doesn't matter. Marketing gets credit for it. Well, my answer to that for security is, if they filled out a questionnaire and they had to look at your policies, or you had to review your policies, or you had to do anything in the process of that deal, you should be getting credit for that, because that's security contribution to pipeline. It may not be security contributed pipeline or security sourced pipeline. You didn't find that deal, but you did have something to do with that coming through, right? You did have something to do with that. The other sort of metrics out there to look at is, think about things like international expansion or compliance requirements. Let's say that you're subject to HIPAA, GLBA, NYDFS, whatever it is, right? Or international standards like DORA, NIS2, whatever it might be in Europe. Well, how much revenue do you make in those countries? Is it 20 million? Is it 40 million? Whatever it is. And how many of your controls were necessary to satisfy that regulatory requirement? That's the sort of stuff that I want to present is, hey, we spent X amount on security, but those controls allowed us to obtain $30 million in revenue by doing business in Europe, because we satisfied all the DORA or NIS2 constraints that are out there, or the NIST AI RMF, EU AI Act, whatever it might be. That's the kind of stuff security's doing. So yeah, you can show incident counts, you can show vulnerabilities, all that stuff. Kind of everyone shows it. I don't think there's a lot of value for the board there. To me, what makes more sense is to start really thinking about revenue and costs, and how security is enabling the organization to operate and obtain money. That's kind of the ultimate way I measure it, is that anything that we can do that shows that security helped, pardon the pun, I guess, secure revenue, that's what matters. That's what we should be talking about.
And with some of those regulations in Europe, there's a % of revenue potential fine. There's also a mitigation component there potentially as well, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And this is where I often lean on my colleagues from Europe, because you kind of need someone dedicated to Europe to understand all the regulation of Europe, because, it often feels like GDP is the enemy over there. But that being said, Europe is a highly regulatory environment. And as a result of that, it's not just the fines, to your point, and how large those fines are. It's also the fact that you've got to have mitigating controls. You've got to have compensating controls. And the other part of a lot of these regulations now is that in the world that we used to live in, regulation was sort of based on the industry you were in, or where the data was stored. But now it's not about that. Now it's really, the regulation is about, well, where are you operating, or who is that data about, and where are they located?
Right.
So it's not about a decision that you can make. It's instead about this kind of entire infrastructure that exists out there, where now you've got to ultimately find a way to deal with this.
All right. So I want to go here next, right? So because Jason and Ben kind of debated this, I see this as an evolution of the CISO role, but not every CISO, I don't believe, can be a chief trust officer. As we look at the different personas, and we've talked about this on the show before, Jeff, certain CISO personas are probably more likely to become chief trust officers than others. Kind of walk us through, like, what's that skill set need to be? I think we know what some of it is, but it just, for CISOs in the audience listening going, hey, would I make a good chief trust? Is that my next career move? Like, what are the things that are going to be important in that role?
I think the biggest one that we see pretty consistently here, and it's one of the kind of archetypes that we've talked about in the six types of CISOs, is customer facing responsibility. So you've got to enjoy and be energized by working and talking to your organization's customers and partners. It's got to be fun for you, because that is really the essence of this role. So if you are an externally facing, almost like an evangelist, like you really enjoy talking about what your security program is doing. You like talking to customers and partners that are asking you questions that you've answered 1,000 times in some cases. If that's what really gets you excited, then I think that's a great signal that this is the kind of role that you could thrive in. If you're more introverted, if you don't necessarily want to drive business that way, if you're more of a, compliance guru or sort of a GRC expert that more wants to sort of think about running a program, but not necessarily evangelizing it, then this may not be a great fit for you. But that's really what I think, is that it's the transformational CISOs out there that love program building and evangelizing it. And then the folks that are already customer facing that really find that they get energy from that and they like being a part of the company's success from that standpoint. Those are the folks that really plug well into this kind of role. For some of the CISOs that might have been around a while, the steady state CISOs out there that just kind of want to run the program, don't want to do the international thing, they're not looking for the next vendor gig or maybe where they transition out or whatever, then, this kind of role may not be the best thing for them. They might be looking for someone on their staff to be a BSO, that, a business information security officer or a deputy CISO, like Ben mentioned, and maybe you handle some of this customer facing stuff off to them and let them nurture themselves and grow that way. But I really think it's transformational and customer facing are the two sort of archetypes that are the most ready to often step into a chief trust officer kind of role.
And so do those other four then become really good lieutenants to the chief trust officer to drive the rest of the security program, right?
I think so. Yeah.
Okay.
So here's a question for you, because I think order of responsibility matters, org chart matters, right? So in organizations that I've been, if you're customer facing, you're evangelizing the organization, you're evangelizing the product, you're going to report into business development, chief revenue officer, somewhere around there, right? And then from an operational perspective, if you're owning security and compliance and things of that nature, you're going to report in through more of the operational side, maybe to the CEO, CFO, chief risk officer, something like that. Do you see an issue there if organizations are like, wait a minute, you're B2B, you're client facing, you're evangelizing this company, you're going to report to the chief revenue officer. Now you have revenue numbers. Do you see some type of a conflict happening there? Could there be a risk there?
Yes, there absolutely can be. In fact, I think it's one of the most common things that we see when a CISO leaves kind of a practitioner CISO role, right? Where they've got operational and executive responsibility for running a security program. And suddenly you see them join maybe a security vendor, as an example, as a chief information security officer or as a field CISO, which is kind of often the title, where they're no longer part of the security org. They are more evangelism, right? They are more sort of tied into revenue numbers. And so I think it's an important distinction to make is, are you bringing me in to talk to other CISOs about how to use our technology, or are you bringing me in as a chief trust officer to run our trust and security program? Those are two really, really different things. And I think CISOs have to be very clear about that. The good news here is that luckily for CISOs, there are a bunch of ways to exit, right? It sort of used to be if you were a CISO, that was kind of a terminal role, right? The old joke about CISO stands for career is suddenly over, right? So luckily now there's a lot of different paths, right? We've seen CISOs become CTOs. We've seen CISOs become CIOs, of course. We've seen them exit and go to kind of vendor land and help drive revenue that way, which I think is a great skill for them to pick up. But now with the chief trust officer role, there's another pathway to do it. But to your point, when you're in that interview process, when you're having a conversation about it, you really want to understand, do you still want to lead a security program? Do you still want to have direct reports? Do you want to have budget responsibility, et cetera? Because if that's the case, then you want to make sure that this role is one, above your old one, generally speaking, and that you are reporting into the CEO, because most chief trust officers do report into the CEO. And if that's not the reporting structure, then I think it's a really strong hint to take a step back and look at what exactly am I being recruited for? Because it's likely that I'm not being recruited to run the security program. I might be recruited to be an evangelist, and I may not want to do that right now. So it's a really important point of
I can almost see a little bit of a power move here to say, we need a security officer here, security person here, trust person here to close deals. You're going to come in and be the closer, right?
Absolutely.
And at that point, that I see risk there.
For sure. If that's not what you want to do, then you could absolutely wind up in the wrong role, in the wrong situation, and suddenly you're kind of sidelined and you look over and then they start building a security program and you're not part of it. You're not running it. You're kind of over here on the other side. So yeah, I think you've got to be really, really careful about that. One of the interesting things that we've seen, and we haven't written about this yet, but what we're starting to see in the startup world or in smaller companies, especially in tech, is that they're actually bringing in CISOs to do part of what you're describing, as well as run the security program before they bring in equivalent of a CIO role. In fact, some of the early stage CISOs we've spoken to, they, suddenly they have things like help desk reporting into them. And end user compute, they've never had this before. They're like, I want to deal with security. I didn't know I was going to run help desk, but the answer is, well, we're a startup. We're B2B. Customers are asking about security. We've got to have a security program. We also need help desk because we're starting to hire employees that aren't developers. So someone has to fix that stuff. But, we don't need a CIO because we're not getting questions about that. We're getting questions about security. And so that's been an interesting conundrum too, of the way that early stage CISO role is changing.
Jeff, a question that we've, and something we've been mulling over a lot in the CISO community, coming out of like SolarWinds and Uber with Joe Sullivan, has to do with liability and personal liability. How do you feel that translates to the chief trust officer? Because to me, it seems like you're sort of transferring some of that liability to a CTO, chief trust officer. So what's your advice to those, and what questions should they be asking about that potential in these roles?
Yeah, we've written about this extensively because it's something I'm really passionate about. In fact, we have Forrester Security and Risk event coming up the first week of November, and we actually have Tim Brown there. He's going to be talking to both our CISO and our CIO clients that are attending 2 events back to back in Austin, Texas. And he's been very transparent with CISOs about what he's experienced so far. So we're super excited. In fact, when the tech leaders heard that he was going to be there and talking about it, they actually sort of campaigned for us to move the session where everyone could attend. So we're stoked about that. But we do feel like personal liability is a huge risk. When you're going into a company, you want to understand indemnification. You want to bring your own personal attorney into that negotiation. You want to make sure that things like insurance, whether it's D&O or E&O insurance, that you're covered under those processes. Of course, those usually don't apply when there's a factual misrepresentation or a deliberate error, so to speak. So you ultimately want to engage your own personal counsel in this and bring them to bear as you're negotiating for that exact reason, right? If we're going to be elevated to a different C-level role, we need to treat that process the same way that every other C-level would treat it. And guess what? Every CEO that's getting hired, they're walking in with personal counsel, helping to negotiate some of their package, right? And so CISOs need to do the exact same thing, because you're absolutely right. We've seen now that CISOs are being held personally accountable in cases, I think, that frankly are a little out there, which some judges have agreed with, because frankly, a number of the charges that were filed by the Department of Justice were kind of kicked away, in the case of Tim Brown in particular. But you can't always count on the company you're working for standing by you, as Sullivan taught us. And I think in that scenario, you've got to walk into this with your eyes fully open. In fact, there are some dedicated law firms that have sprung up around this topic for CISOs that you can go to and ask some questions about. So there are even some legal practices forming around this as an executive role. So I think you should kick the tires on those and really think about, what does personal liability mean?
So, Jeff, I'm going to finish with this question because I think it's really important for us to think about. In a B2B business, the chief trust officer is probably the top position reporting into the CEO. In the B2C world, does the CISO, because you don't really need a chief trust officer, does the CISO get a seat at the table and report into the CEO, or do they kind of stay under the covers? Like, how do you see this between the two different types of businesses? Because, we haven't seen a lot of CISOs reporting directly into CEOs. And maybe that's because in the B2C world, they don't need to. I'm just curious your thoughts there.
Yeah, so in the B2C world, we still see this holding true a little bit because of partners and suppliers. So that's part of the reason why, because obviously partners are a route to market. So if you're B2B to C, for example, then we'll see this kind of morph. Also, because of the regulatory environment and the privacy environment in particular from a B2C perspective, we see this often being a part of the CISO remit, but certainly B2C companies at this point in time, they don't have the penetration or the presence of a chief trust officer the way that we see in B2B. So it's still, at this point, it hasn't quite captured that world the way it has the B2B world. But from a B2C perspective, I think it's really about the legal requirements, the privacy requirements, and then also what are your partners and suppliers forcing on you. That's kind of your route. You're still contributing to revenue, but in a little bit of a different way.
Yeah. Awesome. Jeff, thank you so much for joining us on Business Security Weekly.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
AI gives attackers superpowers, and your employees are the soft target. Flip the script with Fable Security, the modern human risk platform. Fable's powerful risk engine connects the dots on human vulnerabilities, like password hygiene, phishing risk, and data sharing and generative AI, and deploys hyper-targeted snackable AI nudges and briefings, just in time, right where your people work. The result? Hard outcomes. 13x faster behavior change, 60 to 90% risk reduction. Make Fable part of your cybersecurity story. Visit security.weekly.com/Fable. Every AI workflow in your enterprise touches sensitive data. Customer names, email addresses, financial records. One wrong move and you're facing a compliance nightmare. Enter Area, the enterprise AI orchestration and security platform built to protect what matters most. With Area, you don't have to compromise between speed and innovation or security and governance. Quickly deploy AI without cutting corners on compliance. Give your teams the confidence to adapt AI with Area. Stop gambling with your most sensitive information. Visit securityweekly.com/Area to see it in action. That's securityweekly.com/AIRIA. All right, we could have kept going forever, but we got to get into this week's articles. Got to keep us moving, unfortunately. But that was a great segment with Jeff on the Chief Trust Officer. All right, so on that line, you start to see my articles line up this week, kind of off of the previous segment. Why must CISOs slay a cyber dragon to earn business respect? Just change your title, Chief Trust Officer. We're good.
Yeah. Or what Ben said, the Chilean sea bass of security.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness.
Oh, I love it. I mean, I read this article and basically I sat back and I said, why do we as humans in society always have to be reactive? And why are we not proactive? We had seatbelt laws because there were too many accidents and too many people flying out of windshields. We had drunk driver laws because we had too many drunk driving accidents. Why can't we just be proactive, right? Why do we have to have a breach in order for companies to actually invest in security? I mean, that's the cliff notes of this article right here.
Yeah.
Dollars, man. Dollars. It's all about the money.
I don't know.
But this one goes even more. This is even more than just invest in security. It's invest in someone who has actually lived through that. It becomes much more personal on this level, right? It's not just saying, hey, in order to get any money, we have to have it. But the CISO that we hire has to have been through a full breach and has to have that badge of honor. So, it's like saying I'm not going to hire a police officer unless that police officer has, done X, A, B, C, X, Y, Z, shot a suspect, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah. And again, this goes back a little bit to the previous segment, right? I asked Jeff specifically about the different personas. This is the reactive, this is the post-breach CISO, right? And so now but that's not one that he identified as being in a position to move up to this concept of a chief trust officer where you gain business respect because now you're tying and associating the program to revenue, right? It's like almost going backwards a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, again, it's reactive. I look at this as reactive, right? And the second I ended this article, it just reminded me back to reactive laws that are always on the books. And think about it; it happens all over society. We have to wait until things blow up in order for there to be some type of a law, a regulation, a policy, investment, things of that nature. And I don't know, man. I wish we were way more proactive and said, why don't we bring in a CISO who's the preventative CISO, who's going to move the business forward, who's going to not put us in a position that we'll ever have a breach, instead of hiring the CISO who's the cleaner, right? They come in and they clean it up after.
Yep. Yeah. Yep. Number 2, the human cost of defense, a CISO's view from the war room. So this is actually a documentary that is being, I think it's been released, actually. I didn't look it up to watch it yet.
Yeah, me either. Has anybody seen it on here?
No, I want to watch it now.
Yeah,
I know. Because I'm reading through this going,
it's
oh
a
my
premiering
gosh.
early next year is what it said at the end of
got
the
it.
article. Yeah.
Got
They've got a decent number of people in here that carry some weight. So Jenny Easterly, Petraeus,
Right.
Yeah. So I mean, Chris Ingalls.
Yeah, and it really highlights, I guess, the kind of the human struggle and the burnout of the industry, right?
Right.
Which I think is important, right? We talk about that. We cover different articles around that here because it's a real issue. And this documentary kind of digs in and actually gets behind the scenes of some of this and kind of brings it to light, which I thought was interesting.
Yeah, I mean, I love how they basically coined it. Our cybersecurity professionals today are the makings of a great story and a great film. I mean, it's true. I mean, they're the unsung heroes, right? I mean, they actually talk about redefining the hero archetype. I mean, our defenders are heroes. They're saving, they're saving businesses, potentially life and safety every day. So I think it's kind of cool that this is going to get bubbled up. I want to watch it. I want to see it.
Yep.
Instead of CSI Miami, maybe we can have CISO Pittsburgh.
Right?
Be a whole TV show.
Pittsburgh of all places. Okay.
Come on. That's right.
Do it right on Carnegie Mellon's campus, right?
That's right. Yeah, that's right.
There's a breach. It's not a breach. It's just an incident.
Yeah, it's an event, not an incident, Ben.
Oh, gosh. Oh, that first segment got you guys wound up. Next article, CISO security priorities reveal an augmented cyber agenda. Now, one of the reports that Jeff sent me in advance was where the priorities are, right? This article hits a little bit of it, but this gets a little more specific. The report that Jeff sent me, and he said it in the segment before, he said the top 3 priorities: regulatory, partners, customers. That's what's driving this kind of chief trust officer role. This gets into some of the other specifics, but at the end of the day, right, he's highlighting that, look, most of your requirements are coming externally. They're not necessarily internally based.
Yeah, I mean, Ben said it earlier. It's all about the money, right? At the end of the day, customers are paying the bills. We need to make sure that those customers are happy. They trust us. The foundation of every relationship is built on trust. So those organizations won't be doing business with us if they don't trust us, if they don't know we have a good posture. So
I mean, I think that's the sum of like most everything, right? Like when you really get down to it, it's about the dollars, right? Because no feature gets added to a product unless somebody thinks generally. I mean, there are very weird exceptions, but generally something does not get added to a product, whatever that product is, unless somebody's going to pay for it. Why would you put the effort in, right? There's a perception that someone will pay. Maybe they don't, but there's a perception that they will. And so I think that's the same thing here, right? Like if there's not a perception that there's a return on the investment that you're going to make, you're not going to do it, which is stymied a lot of security for a long time. And going back to that very first article, it's why when we think about like the challenge that we have as CISOs, unless you've stopped something that's could have had material impact to the business and shown it, which a lot of times we can't. It's the absence of being able to show something that's our problem. You can't get the budget for it.
Right. And I think that, while I planted my flag in the ground that a CISO should have been doing that for the last couple of decades, I get it. Chief Trust Officer may be that next evolution of title that we need to talk about to be able to disrupt what we've been doing. But I'll tell you right now, we've talked about it on the show all the time. As a CISO, showing how you enable revenue, showing how you enable customer acquisition, showing how you equate to closed won opportunities in driving revenue is something we should have been doing for a long time. Mm-hmm. I've told stories about how I did that as a first-time CISO in an organization, right? And that's how you make impact, to the point where the next evolution of my career was becoming the CIO of that organization, where the CEO said, go do that with IT now.
Yeah. Yeah. Be careful, Jason. You're going to be a chief trust officer.
Yeah. One thing I do want to call out in this, the augmented cyber agenda is, we are pivoting a lot towards AI, and like you're not going to get away from that, right? It is the way of the world. Everything's going that way. The business is headed that way. You have to get out in front of it. But one of the things that concerns me about this is, are we giving up our ability to understand like core principles and why we do this stuff in the first place, right? Like what didn't make it on this list in, you look at key security profiles, and then when it got down to actually AI enabled attacks, there wasn't an attack about a concern about AI having its own vector of attack because it decides it wants to do something that you're not expecting it to do, right? And our lack of understanding of how AI interacts with AI. And I think as we get further down the use of people relying on it as a crutch, are we giving up those core principles in 10, 15 years? The people who are replacing us and who are leading programs aren't going to understand why we're supposed to be doing the things we're doing. And so that goes awry very quickly, right? I mean, that's one of the things I tell my kids. Yeah, you want to learn how to use AI when you're working on your schoolwork, but you can't rely on it, because then when you don't have that, you're not going to know how to do it.
It's dependency. You can't become dependent on it.
Yeah.
And that's a core element of any of the AI frameworks that have come out, right? You have to be able to back out of it. You've got to be able to still operate without it. But what the thing that I keyed in on with this article that I really liked was the gentleman who was mentioning, hey, I'm really focused on data classification because we're terrible at that in this field, and it's really important for AI. And then he also just briefly mentioned using what we have more completely. He talked about tool consolidation. Yes. And that using what we have. And I just love that, because it doesn't always have to be chasing what's new. It's looking at what you have and saying, wow, I have this amazing iPhone. What am I not using it for? I know it's super powerful. Do I actually need to get a Fitbit? Or is the iPhone already have that, right? No offense to Fitbit. I think they're great. But, using what you have and understanding the tools that you have to really reap the benefit from them. And I think that's actually something that we could in the community start measuring that ourselves. How completely are we using the tools that we have? Maybe it's just an internal measure.
Great metaphor, Summer. Like how many people are paying 90% of the value for 10% of the features and don't even realize it, right? And when you look at a security program, when you go in as a new CISO, and you're going to replace something and you don't even look at like what the capabilities it has and why you're doing that, and look at completeness of the solutions you have deployed. And that's one of the metrics you should be relaying back to the board is what is the percentage of tool use that you're actually encompassing for the deployments that you already have. Hey, we're only at 30%. We've got a lot more ways to go before we actually 100%. Look at new tool investment.
Yep. Yeah. It's exactly why I've always evangelized for the ecosystem approach. You know this, Matt. For years, I've said the ecosystem is the way, because you go out there and you buy 15 best of breed products and you adopt 5% of each, you're getting nowhere, right? And we all know the metrics. Adoption rates are low. They're very, very low when you buy new products. So leverage the ecosystem you have, leverage the licensing you have. You're training across one ecosystem, so now your adoption rates are going to increase. All the better for it. Better context, better integration, better visibility. It's a win-win.
Yeah. And that means there's only certain players. Remember, we talked through this a couple months ago about the consolidation. we know where some of those big platform players are, right? Yeah. And it's going to continue. Yeah. What I thought was interesting a little bit in that article, though, as they were talking through the AI stuff, we're actually going to do a segment in a couple weeks. The technology, the infrastructure behind, and Ben, you said this, like, how does AI communicate to AI? Model context protocol is actually how it communicates. Mm-hmm. How are we securing MCP, right? So I'm actually bringing a guest on in a couple weeks to talk through some of those challenges, because these are the things I think we have blind spots into around some of these AI conversations. Yep. And so these are going to be new evolving areas from what I need to put into my security program, because I got to understand how this stuff works so I know how to protect it. So
100%. I mean, Matt, that's the forward conversation that teams are having right now. I literally had the MCP conversation last Thursday.
Yep.
Last Thursday, we were talking about that. I mean, it's front and center. We have to be having these conversations. So I'm glad to hear we're going to have a guest.
Yeah. It's just something that it came up a little bit at Black Hat. And so I found a guest, like I said, he's coming on in a week or two.
Yep.
And I want to dig into it because I think it's a blind spot for all of us. Like, how do these systems work? How do we protect them? And so anyways, coming to a podcast soon.
Modern attacks don't just hit devices. They target your users to gain access to Microsoft 365 and Google Workspace. And when those platforms go down, it's not just email, it's your entire business. That's why there's Kaseya 365 User, one unified platform that protects your users and SaaS applications. Phishing, credential leaks, insider risks, it stops them all. Learn more and schedule a demo at securityweekly.com/K365.
Next article. I love this article, by the way.
Me too.
Simon Sinek says the most successful people in the world hit zero or come close to it. Failure is the gift. Now, quick story. When I built Control Path, we sold that business off to Trustwave. Like 6 months later, I was gone. And I was in, and it was not a good exit. Let's just put it that way. Right. And for 6 months, I was angry. Like I wasn't working. I've talked to some of my former colleagues about this, but I mean, I was at the bottom. Like it was just crazy. Right. But it makes you think, it makes you stronger. Right. Yep. And I kind of vowed from that experience that I was never going to go through that again. I just wasn't. And here's this article talking about why sometimes failure is the gift, because it makes you reflect. It makes you really think, and you figure out how to get better so it doesn't happen again. And that leads you onto a very different path.
100%. I mean, it's the foundation. It's a prerequisite for success. I mean, when you fail and you get up and you learn from it, that knowledge that you obtain is priceless. It's absolutely priceless. Plus, it gives you strength. It gives you resilience. It gives you grit. It makes you want to grind. Like, I think failure has to be a part of everyone's success. You have to learn from those failures. You have to.
And I think there are two important factors with this. One, you don't have to hit bottom or hit zero to call it a failure. So you can have little failures that also build up into the lessons for success. So people don't have to think like, yeah, I've got to lose my job. I've got to, empty my bank account for this to actually be what's going to launch me there. Definitely not that. Learn from the little failures every day. And number two, I always tell my kids to each other that real success is also learning from the failure of others so that you don't have to experience it. Like when I see my one kid doing something bad, I turn to the other and I'm like, and I hope you see the lesson in this too.
Right.
Don't be as stupid as your sister, like that kind of thing. And so, but I mean, I'm serious, right? And I think those are important things for people to think about as well.
And just
from
to add into to your point, Summer, I've always had a mantra of fail fast, right? When I talk to the teams, it's identifying when things are starting to go off the rails, in a way that you can bring it back on the rails is deciding, all right, wait a minute. This is a failure, right? This is something I need to learn from. And now how do we go adjust? Because there are folks who will sit there and beat their head against the monitor forever and just fail into infinity, right? And never be able to get back on the rails. So
that's
something
what you got to
be
look for on your
cognizant
team,
of.
right? You have to look for people who recover quickly. And that's always what I've told, the board or the other execs, like when I'm, talking about what the role of the CISO is. It's not to make sure we don't get compromised or have an incident or an issue. That's going to eventually happen. It's how quickly we recover, how resilient we are, right? And personally, how resilient are you, right? Like, how do you recover from things? And if you're not recovering well, use it as a learning experience to figure out how to tweak that.
Yeah. I'm going to put the old crotchety CISO out there again because I did in the last segment, but I think that's something that the younger generation of workforce that I'm seeing come in isn't used to. They're not used to some failures. They're not used to the grind and the grit. And sometimes when you challenge them and say, this isn't working, it's hard for them. So we as leaders need to realize that.
We didn't all get trophies. We didn't all get trophies. When we were
I
kids,
know.
right?
I mean,
it wasn't, you did a wonderful job. Like you didn't fail. You won. Kind of.
That's the workforce. We're getting the workforce byproduct of that right now, though, Ben. Right? We're getting the byproduct in the workforce right now of that, and it's hard because when this younger workforce does fail, it's like monumental failure versus something that's like, all right, let's get in this, let's adjust, let's fix. It becomes this monumental thing.
Enjoy the suck.
enjoy the suck.
The beatings will continue until morale improves.
I think we have one of those shirts too.
We're just kidding, folks. We're actually nicer than this.
Right.
I
So
heard embrace
speaking
the suck for a long time in my military career, that's for sure.
So we transition into health and wellness, what every leader can learn from the principles of yoga, folks.
Enjoy the suck.
Yes.
My yoga in the Marine days was quarter deck of pull-ups and push-ups and sit-ups and getting ground into the.
Yeah.
No. But I mean, I've never done yoga, so I don't really know much about this space. But at the end of the day, I love the fact that they're talking about leverage your energy for the positive, right? Because if something bad's happening, you can always shift your energy. That's something you can control, your attitude, your energy toward it, right? So that way you can take a stressful situation, make the best out of it. Intuition's huge. I think intuition is a huge thing. Now, in a silo, it can be bad, but when you leverage your intuition with analysis and knowledge and the right information in front of you, I think it's a piece of the puzzle. We've all heard keep it simple, stupid, right? So simplicity, I think, is something important too.
I think the other thing that I wish this article would have tied together, because I love the concept of what yoga brings. And people can find this in different ways, right? You can find this in nature. Like if you don't do actual yoga, you can find it through like a religious group that you're with. It doesn't have to be yoga, but the messaging is about that centering yourself, finding that breathing and being able to do this. When they talked about intuition, what I wish they would have noted is that you actually need to do the other things to make sure that you are in the right spot to be able to lean on that intuition. Because if you're in a really bad place, your intuition might be off and you might think, I'm going with my intuition on this one. So I think there's an element of find the balance, get to the good spot, and then listen to your intuition.
That's a great point, Summer, because it's the emotion versus the intuition. Because sometimes you're letting emotions control versus the intuition, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. I don't do yoga, so I put it out there for everybody else. It's all right. All right. Last article for the week. The remote leadership paradox. Why your team feels micromanaged and abandoned and how to fix it. Interesting article.
I like the article, honestly. I mean, I think, my organization is almost fully remote, right? I mean, we do have some times where we meet in the office, but the majority of us are remote. And, I can see some of the extreme sides that I may want to pay attention to see if they're happening, right? Because they said there's really a couple of different approaches that managers have been taking. One of them is the surveillance approach, where it's the micromanage, always on top of, don't know what's going on, need to have that visibility. And then the other side is the trust fall, which is like that radical autonomy, they call it. And those are two divergent management styles where, they start to go into how do you find that happy middle ground in between the two. I read the article and I said, maybe I need to start paying attention to my leaders and the directors and the managers and kind of see what their remote workforce style is like to see if we have to maybe rein some things in.
Yeah, because it talks about all the challenges with the existing tools, right? And it's right. Like, we monitor Slack all day long, right?
Yes.
And so every time you see a Slack message, you jump to go answer it. Got to go answer it, right? Yep. And we're constantly, not just Zoom. I'm on 3 different meeting systems a day, right? Between Google Chat or whatever it's called and Zoom and Teams. Like, I'm constantly on those things. Like, I average like 28 hours a week or something crazy on video calls. I do. Like, it's nuts, right?
Yeah.
And so, you kind of sit back and you're like, wait a minute.
And it's not only those that they called out, like, because they called out project management tools as well, but I'll relate that to other line of business applications because it could be your ITSM, it could be things like that. And it's funny because they called it the creating the reporting theater. Instead of it being like a transparency and efficiency tool, it became the busy work tool to acknowledge your existence to the world, right? Yep. I exist and I'm worthy and I'm worth it. And you're always entering stuff in your busy work.
Though. Like it's not just leaders, it's companies that are doing this, right? Like I think the return to office paradox is hey, look, I'm out there, I'm open about it. I'm not a fan, right? I think there are people that need to be in the office, and I think there is value. You know, Jason, you called out younger workers, right? I think people are new and entering the workforce, trying to figure out how to do things. I think there's a big benefit to it, but I think managing people just on, you know, are you in the office 8 to 5, right? Are you on communicator certain amount of hours during the day? Like these things, I don't think they benefit the long-term success of the employer relationship, the productivity of an employee. Like it doesn't work. You mentioned the theater of it all. Like I think we're doing stuff just to pass the metrics, and at the end of the day, we're not encouraging people to do the right thing and to be mature adults and to run their business the way they should run their business.
It's the tipping point of leaning on policy so much you forget the human, right?
Yeah, and I think even the return to office thing is so, we could talk about that for days and days. But Ben, even the concept of just having the younger workforce in the office, I don't even know what that brings if you don't have the middle and later term workforce for them to learn from.
Yeah, that's
right?
what I agree. Like there's a disconnect of like if everybody's never in the office, like how do younger people figure out like what to do, right?
Yeah.
So there is some value in that, but at the end of the day, like just forcing everybody to go in because we don't know how else to manage people, like that's
doesn't
just
make sense.
as bad, right? It's again like this article, the two extremes of it, right? If people aren't being effective and productive, like you should be able to figure that out without requiring a locational component of them, right? Like I like to tell, like in the past, if you want to be in Vail, Colorado and skiing, as long as like everything's getting done the way it should be done, like I don't really care if you're some spectacular human that can get things done in 10 minutes a week. Awesome. Like it's about output and expectations. I just shouldn't feel like I need you as a butt in a seat looking at a screen. Again, I think back earlier in my career, there were times when it just felt like you were putting in hours and trying to figure out stuff to do in the office, and there was no real reason for you to be there. And I think we've all been there in situations like that, right? And it's not productive or helpful.
No, not at all. I agree, Ben. I mean, I think we all need to start taking that mentality of we should be able to have a workforce that's completely disparate around the world, around the country, wherever the case may be. And they may not have a home base. We need to learn how to manage to that, right? We need
to figure out this new reality. Like, what's it look like, right? There's a ton of tools out there. Let's use the tools more effectively to encourage a new method of working and engaging with people.
Right, but don't fall victim to those two extremes at the same time.
Yeah. I think
Balance.
The flip side of that is also not just thinking about how do we get more productivity, how do we manage, how do we also celebrate? So it's kind of tough, and I forget about this when we're a remote workforce.
Yeah.
How do you actually bring that recognition and make people feel appreciated and in that? So I think it's also take that coin and flip it over and say not just about monitoring, but about lauding and applauding.
Yep.
Yeah.
And as we move forward, like we talked about AI earlier, right? I think this is one of the areas where AI is going to be really transformative, and we need to figure out what that looks like, because if AI is doing more of the workload and people are working less, are they less productive, or like how does that balance work out, right? Where does the ratio of value versus effort come in with the emergence of AI and the transformation that's going to take place?
Our expectations just continue to shift, Ben. That's going to be the problem, right? We're going to expect more and more and more because now AI is doing more for us. So that's the other challenge. And that's when what this article reminded me of is, how to monitor your team for things like burnout, right? Like at times, right? Look, we do daily stand-ups, right? Every morning we all get in, we do our stand-up, everybody gives their stuff. Is that enough for me to know who on my team's really like maxed out and ready to burn? No, right?
Absolutely not. But to Ben's point, Matt, this is where AI comes in handy, because there's this thing called sentiment analysis. And AI can be saying, wait a minute, Jason's always chipper and cheery when he's messaging people all day long. Holy crap, he's a crabby ass right now. What's going on? Right? Sentiment analysis is a thing. And that's where health benefits come into play. Because if all of a sudden I'm getting burnt out and I'm cranky all the time when I'm usually not, maybe that's a good indicator that we can bubble up.
Yeah. Because it's hard to monitor in a remote environment,
That's right.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. Because we did an on-site 2 weeks ago. That's why I think I left right after the show, went to Boston with the engineering team. Like, it was super positive. It was great kind of reinvigoration, but I could tell the team was kind of getting a little burned out, right? It was time to go intervene, not really intervene, but I mean, like, really start to plan out kind of the next set of things to get them kind of reinvigorated.
Yeah.
But you got to know when to do that. Otherwise, you go too long, and next thing you know, they're just like, whoop, yeah, it's too late.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, that's a challenge. Oh, always a pleasure, all of you. It was great to have you all on this week.
Yeah.
Thank you, everyone, for watching and listening. We'll see you next week on Business Security Weekly.